Okay, just turning off everything.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's YANGtime webinar. We have Tunc with Temel Gaskets presenting on the philosophy of problem solving. Tunc has been officially at Temel Gaskets for 8 years, but has been involved with the business for as long as he can remember. So without further ado, I will pass this on to Tunc. He will take questions and address them as he can, but if not, definitely at the end. So enjoy today's webinar. Tunc, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. And I just want to start off with you guys being able to see me on the webcam, but I'm going to switch over to the slide completely in a little bit. Like Katie said, I've been working for Temel Gaskets full-time officially for about 8 years, but I grew up in this business since it's been a family business, so I've really been involved with everything that's been going on for many more years than that. And about 9-10 years ago, when I did my MBA program, I was introduced to this concept of Six Sigma, and when I took my first training class on it, which is a green belt level class, and I'll tell you a little bit about what that means too, I found out that there's a name for the way that I was naturally inclined to do things, and I really embraced all of the concepts, and I then later found opportunities to do further studies in it and become a teacher of these concepts too. So I appreciate the opportunity for Auto Care Association and Yang giving me the opportunity that they're giving me to share what I've learned through this experience and how this can be applied to any kind of situation, any industry, and specifically the auto industry. And I also appreciate you taking the time to connect today and listen to some of the insights that I've picked up along the way. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them up in the question box that I think will appear on your screen also. And I should be able to see your questions while I'm presenting. Normally I do this presentation in person, and I'd like to do it as interactively as possible. So along the way, when you see concepts that apply to what you do on a daily basis, and if you do have examples of how you have you been maybe applying it without calling them what we're about to call them, and without consciously knowing that these concepts are coming from Six Sigma and what we refer to as philosophy of problem solving. So feel free to type up those questions, and as I can, during the presentation, I'm going to incorporate those, and after the presentation, I'll go back to the list and pick a few to answer. And at the very end of it, if I don't get to answer your questions, I think my contact information will be available, and some of you, I assume, already has it. Feel free to reach out to me directly. I am more than happy to help out. I'm more than happy to point you to the right sources where you can find additional details on all of these concepts. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my webcam so that we can make use of the entire screen for the slides. There we go. Okay. I should have disappeared from your screen. So it's just going to be my voice from this point on. Well, the concepts that we're going to talk about today, they come from the methodology called Six Sigma, but I prefer to refer to it as philosophy of problem solving. And we're going to look at why it's a philosophy and why it's really just a way of thinking. And in the companies that I do this as a consultant for, I emphasize strictly that this is not something that we do in addition to what we do on a daily basis, but it's something that becomes the way we do things. So we'll really focus on the philosophy part of it, focus on the mind shift that we hope organizations to have. And I have a handout that I think we were hoping to put it in the handout section in the box that's for the webinar menu box. So there's a handout that says 0 for now, but we might be able to put that on there afterwards or during the presentation. But if not, we'll email that to you, and on that handout you'll basically have a list of all of the key concepts that we're going to cover, so don't mind taking notes. Just focus on the slides, and if you have any questions, just make notes of those, and afterwards you'll have a list of all the key concepts that we covered today. So we'll start off real quick. I'm going to go through a list of keywords that I will cover in more detail, and these are going to be the keywords that we will make note of, and they'll be the critical ones to remember. And we'll take a look at what defect and quality mean for us. We'll take a look at what visibility and consistency mean for us and why they're important. We'll also take a look at reusable effort. We'll look at what measured means and why we're going to emphasize it. We're going to take a look at common language, and common language, you'll see that we don't necessarily mean common language as English, Spanish, German, but it's really the language that we speak within our organization. And a lot of times, my initial experience, I was faced with a lot of acronyms, so learning that common language for me was very important, and it basically meant to learn the acronyms and the terminology that were used within the corporation. Although we were all speaking in English, that was a necessary step. Being scientific is extremely important, and the whole philosophy is really based on doing everything we do in a scientific way, and we'll go into more details on that. Culture versus procedure. And this basically is going to mean to us that we want to include all of these concepts as the way we do things. So culture basically is a set of traditions, behavior, and just how you would expect things to be done, versus having a very thick training manual describing all procedures that are not exactly the way things happen in real life. So we really just want to embrace all of this and make sure that what we do, kind of like what ISO 9001 requires. If your company has it, you might be familiar with this, but the basic requirement for an ISO 9001 standard certification is do what you document and document what you do. And eventually, when something is a part of the culture, then that check of, oh, is this what we documented versus is this what we're doing and what the document describes, that really goes away. And then next, we don't want to be opinion-based as much as possible. We want to stay away from any one person's opinion. And by doing that, we will focus more on facts, we will focus more on measurements, we will focus more on scientific statements. And lastly, quantitative versus qualitative. These are both measurement types, but we want to stay more on the quantitative side, which really measures using some kind of measurement instrument, versus qualitative that uses descriptions. But either way, we want to have standard definitions of these measurements. So these are a quick list of key concepts and things that we want to remember from today. And we'll revisit this list at the end. And I think you'll notice that what you might be thinking when you go through this list about each one of these items will be different once we cover the material. So a quick recap of why I'm a good person to give you this overview, and how I became, how I gained the experience that that now allows me to teach this this material, also this subject, is the fact that I've worked with Fortune 500 companies on over more than 100 projects. One of my earliest projects were with the use of just one simple tool, which was a Pareto chart. I was able to save the company $10 million in just one quarter. And all of these are going to be based on these simple, effective, and sometimes very trivial concepts. And what we want to do is be conscious about what's available to us and consciously apply these concepts. And I'm a Six Sigma Master Black Belt, which means that I am qualified to teach this material. When you start off, you first take a training course that gives you the green belt trained level, and once you finish your first project, you become a green belt. And following that, you can take a black belt training course, and with the black belt training course, you basically become a full-time resource for the organization that you're part of. And so you're basically you're seen as a source for Six Sigma related knowledge, but you're not necessarily mentoring projects. And as you gain more experience and start mentoring projects, you gain the necessary experience to be able to teach it to others, and you reach the master black belt level after so many projects and mentoring. And the projects that I've done using the exact same concepts, they were in manufacturing related fields: human resources, supply chain, sales, finance, accounting, insurance, data analysis, software development. So it's all over the board, and all of these can be applied in any of these industries. So what is Six Sigma? Okay, Six Sigma, very briefly, is something that I always want to refer to as philosophy of problem solving. The actual term of Six Sigma comes from the measurement of how successful we are in delivering what is expected from the process. So how few defects we have as we do something. So meaning if we're operating at the Six Sigma level, which is the ultimate level, which was the level that we want to achieve eventually, but also at the same time it's very difficult, but that's what we strive for. At that level, we only deliver 3 defects per million opportunities. So we do something 1 million times, and we only fail for 3 times. So as you can imagine, for a manufacturing environment, that's a difficult to achieve state of performance. But what we want to do is continuously improve our processes to move towards that level as much as we can. And in some of our cases, we don't even have 1 million opportunities to repeat a process. So if you only get 100 chances to do something, then that means if you're operating at Six Sigma level, every single opportunity is a successful result. So that's where at the simplest level, the Six Sigma reference comes from. But again, we want to focus today on on the philosophy part of it, on the concepts that it encourages. Manufacturing or service. See, this is the slight misconception a portion of the audience that's interested in Six Sigma might have, is that Six Sigma is only related to manufacturing-related industries. It is driven by manufacturing-related industries. It was made popular. Well, it was founded by Motorola, and it was made popular by GE, both companies from the manufacturing industries. But the concepts apply exactly the same way to service-related industries. And in my experience, I found that service-related industries have even more processes that they're not aware of. So eventually, when we dive in, we find a greater number of opportunities to utilize what Six Sigma can provide, and basically achieve the same level of success in both types of industries. Let's talk about this philosophy a little bit. Six Sigma is customer focused, so whatever we do, we ask ourselves the question of how the customers are going to be impacted, and customers can be internal and external. So we're not necessarily talking about the people that are not a part of the company. They might be a part of the company too. And Six Sigma is about asking the right questions. When I go into a project, I don't necessarily need to be familiar with the subject, because I rely on the subject matter experts to provide the specific information for the project, because I'm confident that I'll be able to ask the right questions. So by going through this process that we're going to cover in a little bit, I have a set of tools that allow me to identify the right questions, and once the right questions are identified, then obtaining that information becomes just a matter of interacting with the subject matter experts. Six Sigma is an enterprise-wide effort, so we can't just have a couple people doing Six Sigma. a couple people using this philosophy in our organization. We really want to engage the entire organization, and remember, it's not something that we do in addition to what we do on a daily basis, but it's really just how we do what we do every day, and we want to change how we do what we do every day. Six Sigma is a language. Just going back to the common language reference, once we start, so now when I say philosophy of problem solving, you already have something in your mind. When I say Six Sigma, you already have something in your mind that you're thinking of, which it might be different than what you were thinking of before we started this presentation. So that's the kind of common language that we want to build using all of these tools. Furthermore, customer defines quality, so we need to remember that something that we think is great might not be for the customer, or something that we don't think is great might be sufficient for what the customer wants. So we need to remind ourselves that we're running businesses, and so we have to make sure that what we do is aligned with what our customers expect. So we don't want to overdo and cost the business more than necessary, and we don't definitely want to undershoot and start losing customers and not fulfilling what our customers are looking for. And similarly, customers define defects too. We might believe that we have the greatest product, but if our customers think that it's defective, then we need to revisit what we see as the perfect product and what we see as the product that should be coming out as a result of this process. Just like I mentioned, Six Sigma, the level of that performance strives for 3.4 defects per million opportunities. So that's almost perfect. And we aim for continuous improvement. We're not going to just stop because we fixed something today. We know that over time we need to revisit processes. Over time, our customers' expectations change. Over time, the environment, the conditions that surround the environment, they change. And so we need to continuously revisit to look for further opportunities for improvement and look for improvements that we can do based on today's requirements. So next up, what we're going to do is we'll see how we might observe a shift of culture as we get more educated on Six Sigma and philosophy of problem solving. And for this piece of this presentation, we're going to look at two individuals, and one is going to be an analyst. His name is John, and the other person is going to be Robert, John's manager. And we'll look at the conversation that they're having among each other, when they have issues come up, and how they approach these issues. So before they've been trained on Six Sigma, they haven't seen this presentation. They're just going about their daily lives, and John comes to Robert and says, "Robert, we have a problem." And John says, "What's the problem?" Right? Usually classic response to someone saying that they have a problem. And John says, "Customers are not getting billed." Well, generally the manager says, "Well, get someone to do it manually, take care of it, and then we move away." Well, as the problem is solved, not necessarily. What we did was we just patched the problem, and we're basically leaving it to pop up again in the future. So now we're going to go back to the methodology, and we'll revisit John and Robert and see how that conversation will change for them. The methodology works similar to an equation. We say y is a function of x, or x's, and everything in the world is an outcome of various factors. And only if we control the factors, which might be just one x, or in many cases multiple x's, we can change the outcome. So what we understand is there's something we want to control, and this consists of many other factors. And what we want to do is we want to identify these individual factors so we can have some impact on this outcome. And the methodology focuses on things that are measurable, and anything that we deal with is measurable. Okay? And business decisions should be based on specific and measurable data. Whenever we're talking about opinions, we'll find it very challenging to act on them, number one, and we'll also find it very challenging to go back and compare our results and see how much performance improvement we've achieved. So cost benefit can only be done if that is measurable. So because again, we're almost always doing this in a business context, we want to make sure that we have the numbers when we're describing the current state, and we have the numbers that when we're describing the future state that we want to achieve. So more on the methodology, again, it's not opinion-based data. And most business decisions, unfortunately, what I've seen in my experience in my consulting projects, that they are opinion-based. And in my training classes, I emphasize that there's an advantage to pretending like you're a consultant, even if you're a part of the company, because as a consultant, you can't necessarily deliver your opinion just purely based on your opinion as the final result of a project. So there's always a need to find facts and data to back the final recommendation. So as an employee, we should do exactly the same thing, because only then we will be welcoming other people's contribution to what we're presenting. And so what I often see is that businesses talk in meetings a lot about opinions of subject matter experts maybe. For example, this process is inefficient. And the thing that I see probably most frequently is that the description of lack of something. So there's a lack of communication between departments. Well, it's hard to know if this means there's no communication between departments, which in fact is a measurement. If you say there's zero communication between departments, you're measuring. And when you're saying lack of communication, that might mean not sufficient not enough communication, or there might be some communication, there needs to be more. So it's very ambiguous. And if we make some kind of improvement, we can't go back to the state of lack of communication and measure the amount of improvement that we achieved. So we always want to have some kind of measure. The two departments, for example, communicate twice weekly. They need to be communicating on a daily basis, so once every day. Now, from 2 to 5, I know what kind of improvement I need to achieve. So again, opinion-based data is very difficult to work with. The methodology of Six Sigma, philosophy of problem solving, provides a process, and this is the thing that we rely on. And it's a proven process to solve problems, and we'll see how it helps us break down the current state, which we will approach as the problematic state, and go through a process that will provide us ways to come up with solutions to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And it, obviously, as a part of this process, it provides the tools to understand current conditions, identify root causes, and derive conclusions. So the process that we use as a part of Six Sigma and the philosophy of problem solving is the process called the DMAIC process. And that's an acronym that stands for define, which starts basically the very first thing we do is defining what we're dealing with. And we'll go into more details in each of these in a little bit. The second letter in the acronym is measure. So we go out and collect detailed measurements on the current state to better understand it. The third letter is analyze. So we interpret what's going on. And so basically in the define phase, we have a low resolution picture of what's going on, and then in the measure phase, we come up with a higher resolution picture. In the analyze phase, we interpret this picture, we tell the story, and in the improve phase, we're coming up with, I mean, at that point, once we start interpreting, then we're coming up with possible solutions, and basically an ongoing piece. So we go through define, measure, analyze, and improve, and by the time we get the control, we go into this continuous cycle, and that's the continuous improvement, and that's the part that we say, all right, from this point on, this is how we're going to do things. From this point on, this is the process that we're going to put in place because we've seen the improvements through these fixes. And we draw a line after analyze right before improve, because up until that line, we only talk about present state. So in the define phase, we are not talking about a solution. In the measure phase, we are not talking about a solution. In the analyze phase, again, we are not talking about a solution. And that's the neat thing about this process. So until we have all the data we need to have, we are relieved of the pressure to know what the possible solution is going to be. And the only part where we talk about anything related to future state is in the define phase, when we define our goal. And we can do that because our goal is set by our customers. Our customers say, this is what I want to have as a result of this process. This is what I want to have as this product. So at the point we're starting, we already know where we need to be, but we don't know how we're going to get there, and that is shown to us as a result of this process, which comes to through the work we do in the measure phase by collecting additional data, in the analyze phase by interpreting this additional data. And when you do an actual project, once you get to the end of analyze, you're already going to be looking at the potential solutions. So improve really just all of these phases are overlapping to a certain extent. There's no clear cut, but analyze to improve is when we start revealing solutions. And after that line, we start talking about future state. So improve gives us solutions. We do pilot studies. We determine what the new process needs to be like, what the new training manual needs to be like, maybe some new equipment that we need to get, new regulations that we need to put in place, new reporting systems. So again, things that will occur in the future, and whatever we decide as now the better way to do things, that will be in the control phase, and that's going to give us the opportunity to maintain the level of success that we've achieved in these pilot studies. So let's go back to the culture and visit John and Robert and see how they might be discussing certain things among each other. So Robert says, our goal is to increase revenue by 20% this year. Very common statement, probably in board meetings, and John says, okay, well, but what's the likelihood of achieving this goal? I mean, think about it. It's such a broad statement, revenue by 20% this year. But I'm pretty sure Robert is going to be unhappy if John doesn't achieve that level. On the other hand, Robert, only if trained on these subjects, would know that this goal needs to be stated more specifically to provide the platform for John to be successful. And it's just not a good foundation for a successful result. So let's go back to the DMAIC approach and see how the DMAIC approach suggests that we set goals. So in the define phase, what we do is we talk about the problem, because we'll talk about the problem on this slide, and the next slide we'll talk about the goal. Those are the two things that we know for sure that we're going after. So at the starting point, we know what the problem is, not necessarily meaning what the root cause of the problem is, but we see a symptom. There's some kind of pain point. There's something that's costing us. There's something that's damaging the customer relationship. There's something that's preventing customer satisfaction. So we know there's a problem. And the second thing we're going to come to is the goal. Like we said, the customers know what they want, and so they set the goal for us at the beginning. So those are the two things that we are completely confident when we're stating at the beginning. But we don't know what the solution is going to be. We don't know what's going to bridge those two, and that's fine, because that's going to come later. So the define phase talks about what the problem is, or some businesses claim they don't have problems, and we might just say ask what the opportunity might be. So what's an opportunity for us to achieve further improvement? Most of the time, a problem. And problem versus observation. Okay, so we want to focus on the observation. We're seeing some symptoms. When you go to the doctor doesn't ask what might be going on. It asks, what are you hurting? What are you feeling? And all these things that are related to the symptoms and your observation, because those are the things that we know for sure are occurring, and from those we can build our story, and from those we can build the rest of the project to understand the And cause versus root cause, when we're starting off, a lot of times we see causes that are on the surface, and root causes are the things that we really want to fix, and that's what the process is going to guide us to. And cost of problem, we want to understand because we're in the business context, we want to know if this problem is worth fixing. So if it's going to cost us $100,000 to fix, but the current problem is costing us $1,000, then from a business perspective, we might take a different approach. So we always want to know the dollar figure of this problem. How much is it costing us? What is the damage? And then obviously we talk about the goal. Well, we want to fix this problem, but what does it mean to fix the problem? It's not the solution. The problem is the present state. So where we are today, described in measurable way, and the goal is basically where we want to be in the future at a given point in time, and what that needs to look like if that was today. So it's not a solution. And we don't jump to conclusions. We take our time until we reach that line between analyze and improve. And we want to set realistic goals. A lot of times, looking at historical results can give us the option to set realistic goals. And what are we going to gain from achieving the goal? Again, similar to cost of the problem, we want to understand what is the dollar gain. How are we going to save a dollar amount? Are we going to generate additional income? So am I stopping money from leaving my pocket, or am I somehow getting more money in our pocket? So let's go back to Robert and John real quick. So now Robert says, our goal is to increase revenue by 20% over the last year while keeping our profits at 12%. So again, we're seeing some kind of improvement. There's the goal is more specific and it's more measurable, and John is getting a fair chance to do something about that. And so the likelihood of achieving this goal is greater. We don't know how big, but it's greater than the previously set goal. And another stab at it could be, last year we had an increase of 18% in our revenues as a result of doubling our customer base. Our profits were at 11% despite the promotional first sign-on pricing. This year our goal is to increase revenue by 20% of our Southeast division while keeping our profits at 12% by focusing on maintaining our customer base. Way more specific. The more specific it is, the easier it is to tell if the goal is realistic, and it's also giving the people that are taking on this goal a fair chance to achieve it. So now John has a better focus. So he's much closer to achieving this goal, and probably more motivated again because it's a smaller scope, it's more specific, it's not as broad as the very first statement as 20% increase of revenue. So let's go into measure phase real quick. Measure phase, once we agree on our problem and goal statement, so we know what the problem is, we know what the goal is, but we understand we probably need to go and get more data on it. We go into the measure phase, and we understand the current phase. We want to measure what matters. We want to use consistent methods. So that's another thing that we put a lot of emphasis on, and we use a tool called data collection plan to ensure that. So we want to make sure, even if it's just us collecting the data, when we collect data multiple times, we want to be consistent. And if we have more people helping us out collecting the data, we want everyone to do it the same way. And be careful using old data. It might not have been collected the same way that you've decided to collect now. So it's sometimes better to throw out old data and collect, and just take your time and make sure that there's consistency across the board. So let's go back to Robert and John again, and Robert says, we have the best portal software, but our field employees are complaining. Probably a very common thing that you might have seen in your organizations also. Then Robert says, it's a new software, they'll get used to it. The top management made the decision to buy it, they think it's a great one, and then they're neglecting the feedback they're getting from the users, the people that are actually using this platform. Has the problem been solved? Obviously not. So let's go back to measure and let's talk about a little more. Let's talk a little more about collecting data. We talked about collecting data, new data if needed. Again, we want to be consistent. We want to just pretend like we're consultants. And if we're getting information that we can't count on, we don't want to report on it either. We want to talk to the people involved. So we want to understand. We want to realize that sometimes what's documented might not be what's really happening. So we want to understand what's really happening, because whatever causing the problem is about what's really happening, not necessarily some training manual that's been sitting on the shelf and has nothing to do with what's really happening. And interview internal, external customers. You know, our customers could be company employees, and our customers could be customers that are from outside. And every opinion is important. We're not saying opinions are not important. What we don't want to do is base our decisions, our final recommendations on opinions, but we want to receive the opinions, the observations of the people that are involved with the processes. And we keep all data points. So that's a reference to outliers. You might have heard this reference. Any data point that looks out of place, leave it there. If it's a natural outcome of the process and there's any slight chance of that occurring again, we still leave it there. And what we do at the thing that we only do with outliers is we explain why that's a freak occurrence, basically, that will never occur again, and report without it. But we never throw out data points. Again, as a consultant, pretending to be a consultant, we can never discard data. So let's go back to culture real quick. The same problem, portal software, field employees are complaining, and Robert says, well, now he's asking questions. So remember, it's asking about asking right questions. So what are they complaining about? Have you done a survey? We've done a survey, and they rated their satisfaction level as 3 out of 10. Has the problem been solved? No. 8 out of 10 surveys that you see probably have some kind of evaluation scale that says, were you satisfied with the service you received? 10 out of, select the number out of 10. Well, how does that really help the company doing the survey improve what they have in place? If you rate them 8. So you rate them 8 or 9, so there's something definitely that you liked about what they delivered, the product or the service, but they don't know what that was and they can't act on it. It's not an actionable question. And if you rated them 1 or 2, there's obviously something that you didn't enjoy, and how are they going to know what to eliminate? So with these questions, we always want to ask them in an actionable form. So when you're rating a process or a product, your rating should indicate some kind of action that the company can take. It should isolate, it should point out, it should identify the thing that you prefer to see in the future examples, or you don't prefer to see in the future examples, so one can be eliminated or replicated. So in this question, level of 3, there's hardly anything that can be done to it because we already knew they were complaining. All right, and we'll see how that conversation is going to improve. Going back to DMAIC quickly about measurables, so we just talked about actionable surveys. Customers' time is expensive, so whatever question we ask, we want to ask just one question, be very effective. If you ever call Delta phone line, I really like the survey that they do at the end of completing call, and they say, well, they tell you it's a one-question survey, and if you stay on the line for it, what they do is they just ask you if you would hire, how likely it is for you to hire the person that helped you out. So I think, to me, is a very good measure of the quality of service one has received. So if you, on a scale of 1 to 5, if you rate that person 5, that means that you would hire that person for your own business, or your own customer service team. And if you rate that person with 1, that means that you wouldn't. And that tells a lot. So one question, customers' time is expensive. They know that too, and they're able to get a lot from just one question. And remember, documentation versus real life again. When you're doing surveys, we want to focus on understanding what's really happening in the real life scenario of things. So back to Robert and John, same situation, same question. And remember, it's an enterprise effort. It's not just Robert learning to ask questions, but it's also John learning to give more complete answers, because they're now thinking the same way. It's a philosophy. They've had the mind shift. And so John is now saying, we've done a survey. We asked them about the login expiration time. They said it takes at least 15 minutes to fill out the expense reports, and the website signs them out automatically in 10. So he is almost providing the answer, but it's just an answer that's in such a complete form that makes the solution obvious. So one solution that Robert can offer here is to increase the sign-out time to 30 minutes. I mean, we don't necessarily know if that's the only thing that they're complaining about, but that's definitely getting us closer to solving the problem, increasing customer satisfaction. So moving on quickly about data collection plan, what we want to remember is the plan needs to describe what data is collected, who is collecting the data, when is it collected, and where is it collected from, and why is it collected. So you can make note of these and use the same questions as a checklist before you send a request to IT. This applies to any kind of situation. You don't have to be sending out a survey to use this list as a checklist, because unless we have all of these and unless we make sure that everyone involved in this data collection know the answers to these, it won't be possible to ensure the consistency of data collected over a long period of time. So going back to the culture again, now we have a different situation. Robert says we need data on the changes in cost of living for cities where we have company offices, and John said the first thing. Robert says, send out a guy from HQ headquarters to each city and ask them to create a report. More than likely, effort's wasted, right? Because we didn't give any kind of data collection plan. So now you know what's necessary. Now you can guess certain things that we need to do ahead of time. And well, they went back to the Six Sigma training, the philosophy of problem-solving training, and they're now thinking about different things, and they're saying, well, for the same situation, Robert says, because he's in charge of all the resources and he doesn't want to spend money on things that are not going to be useful for them, he says, we'll create a data collection plan and include common living expenses such as gas prices, electricity bill, etc. And in the ideal case, we wouldn't recommend, etc. Again, we would recommend a fixed list of items and send a person to each city, ask them to fill out the exact same report by staying within 10 miles radius within our offices. Ask them to report back at the end of the month. So it's a more specific request, and surely it will provide a data set that is more consistent than what they would initially end up with. Efforts better utilized. I mean, there's just no question about that. All right, a few more things about measure phase. As a checklist, we want to make sure that we have a data collection plan. We want to do baseline data, and by baseline, what we really mean is a detailed, measurable description of our problem. And by problem, what we really mean is present state, so where we are currently. Another terminology that we use is entitlement, and entitlement stands for best we've ever performed with the current process in place. So without going back too far back and to times when the process was different, when the products were different, when the people involved were different. So keeping as much as possible consistent. What was the best we've ever performed? And that helps us set a realistic goal. And baseline, entitlement, this terminology feeds into this common language. So once we are trained in this subject, we speak this language, and when we say baseline, we know everyone is going to think of the current state and the measured performance level of the current state. Sigma calculation, something that we're not going to go into in this quick presentation, but if you were taking a green belt class, training class, which is 4 to 5 full days, we definitely touch on that, and we definitely help describe any situation using the sigma calculation. And obviously, once we get to the end of measure phase, we might have a better idea about problem and goal, and we can be more specific in describing these. We take the opportunity to revise those if that's the case. And we have the necessary data. Once we're pleased, we move on to the analyze phase. And analyze is just about understanding the data, interpreting the results, and we review the data numerically and review graphically. So just another thing, useful rule of thumb to keep in mind, whenever you're presented numbers, ask for pictures. So some kind of chart, some kind of illustration of those numbers. And whenever you're presented a chart or an illustration of something that's claimed to be based on data, ask for their ask for the numbers, because only both of those put together will give you the full picture of what's really happening in the process. And eventually ask yourself if it makes sense in real life too. So because sometimes we get data that that's skewed, that's incorrectly collected, and just doing that reality check is important too before you get in front of the steering committee and the top management. So when we're dealing with processes, something we do is what we call a value-add analysis, and this is really an integral part of the philosophy. And what that is we ask 3 questions for every single thing that we do. We ask, do we do it right the first time or not? If we're not doing it right the first time, if we're allowing us to make mistakes, then there's something that we need to fix there. We're not adding value. We're wasting resources. The second thing is we ask ourselves, is the customer willing to pay for it? Because if the customer is not willing to pay for it, then the business is paying for it. And if the business is paying for it, then it's taken away from our profits. So then we either look for a way to eliminate that process step because customer is not willing to pay for it, or we look for ways to make the customer pay for it by making it an obvious for part of the product. So these things are a lot of times quality control. So we need to be doing things right the first time, and if we're paying additional amounts for quality control to check to make sure that we're doing things right the first time, well, our customers are more than likely not willing to pay for us to check our work, because in their minds they're thinking, well, you're supposed to be doing it right the first time anyway. If you go to Starbucks, they don't make the right drink for you, then they toss that drink and then they give you another drink sometimes before you know it. And if they come to you and say, hey, sorry, we messed up, we're just going to charge you for 2 drinks because we had to throw away the first one, now as the customer, you're not going to be happy about it. But because they can't tell you that, every time they mess up, there's something that the customer is not willing to pay for it, and the business ends up willing to pay for it. Businesses are paying for it, so it's not value added. And finally, changing the product physically is important, because unless the product is changed physically, the customer is not seeing that change and is not seeing value in what you paid for. So this is, again, a quality control. If everything is fine with the product and you did a quality control, there's absolutely no physical change to the product, and so from the customer's point of view, there's no value added. No value added, it needs to be removed. If it cannot be removed, we call it an enabler, and these can be government regulations and anything that we're legally required to do that we just need to leave in there. And quality control, again, is non-value added. So a little more about analyze. So we map out the process. We identify each step. We pretend like we're the product, we're the document. So if we're mapping out the process of making a coffee at a Starbucks, what we do is we pretend like we're the cup. So if we're the cup, I'm on the counter right now, I'm not going to move on my own. Something's going to pick me up, and coffee is just not going to pour over me, and so somebody needs to do that step. And unless I pretend like I'm the product, that thing that moves through the process, I might look over some crucial steps. And what I want to do initially is I want to create a current state picture of the process, because we realize there's some kind of problem, and in this problem, in this problematic state, I want to see which process steps might be causing this. And I want to do this value-add analysis and ask the 3 questions, right? Are we doing it right the first time? Is the customer willing to pay for it? And are we physically changing something? And we use additional tools like fishbone diagram that we go we go in depth during a full 4 to 5 day training class. And further on analyze, quick checklist here is process maps, fishbone diagrams. Hypothesis tests are statistical tests that we do in the analyze phase that again are things that we go more in depth in a full week training. Pareto is a visualization tool. Basically, regardless of how big your data set is, gives you the opportunity to describe that data set with one picture. One of my earlier projects, I had a project that required me to analyze 4 million records, and all I did was use one Pareto chart, one picture, basically it's a bar chart, to present this data, and a decision was made on the spot. So it really doesn't matter how many records you're looking at. And at the end of this, we need to make sure we understand the data, because this is the point where we come up with our recommendations for solutions. And going into improve phase, we identify areas for improvement. We might need to take a smaller scope and take a smaller area of focus. We calculate the cost of solution. You know, there are a lot of things we can do, but at the end, again, we're doing all of this in a business context, and how much is it going to cost us to implement the solution is a question that we always need to ask. And create a timeline for implementation and budget, and it's at the end of a business plan again. And begin with what's within your area of authority. This is a very important thing when if you're doing a Six Sigma project to gain further confidence from your top management. I would definitely recommend staying within your area. And not necessarily, if you're not IT, not necessarily come with an IT solution that's likely to take months to implement or get approved. You can take very small incremental steps to prove the effectiveness of these concepts. So quick checklist on improve. We do brainstorm on results. This is the part where I have the full understanding of what's going on and what the root causes are. So now we have all the subject matters experts in one room, and we're brainstorming on the results. And when I say brainstorming, we use facilitation tools that allow us structured brainstorming. So we're brainstorming, but for a purpose. We prioritize solution lists. We might have multiple solutions that we come up with, but we're allocating resources to implement these. So we want to prioritize and go after the ones that really matter. FMEA is one tool that we use. Again, this is something that we do look at more in depth during the full course, and it stands for Failure Modes and Effects Analysis, and it's really a simulation tool. And I have a neat article on this on our blog. If you go to temelgaskets.com/blog, you'll find it in there. I see it as a simulation tool, and what you do is you basically feed in all the data that describes the various scenarios the current process or product might find itself in, and what the likely outcomes are, and what you currently have in place that will prevent the undesired results. And if the current methods of prevention are not sufficient, then we come up with new ways to prevent those. And we talk about future state, obviously, in the improve phase, and what the future state needs to look like, which is the state when we achieve our goal. Budget, very important conversation there. And finally, do we have a solution? Well, most of the time we do. If we don't, we might want to go back to the define phase and reevaluate how we define our problem, reevaluate how we define our goal. And lastly, control is just about continuous improvement. It's about monitoring the results, because eventually when we come to the improve phase, we almost always come up with a new way of looking at things, and we want to continue looking at things the same way so we can quickly identify the root causes of the problem that we saw and prevent those from happening again. And we report on defects that we now have defined very clearly in measurable terms. And we maintain the Six Sigma approach. This is the philosophy piece. We want to cause a mind shift. We want to cause a change in culture, and we want to maintain that over a long time. We want to maintain consistent measures eventually. So quick checklist for control phase, control charts, obviously, standard operating procedures, reporting systems, and do we have ways to monitor the process. So eventually, we've implemented something. We want to make sure that it's implemented and it's executed the same way in the future. And let's go back to culture real quick. Robert, we have a problem, John says, and Robert asks what the problem is. Customers are not getting billed, and now Robert has many questions to ask because he thinks about asking the right questions so that resources are used for the right purposes. Let's go back to it one more time, and this time John has other things to say. Let's go. Yeah, here we go. So now they're having a more detailed conversation up front before they're taking any kind of action. So Robert asks how many times it happened, how many customers haven't been billed, how long it's been going on, is it internal? And now John says it happened 3 times. So he came prepared to answer all these questions because he's thinking about the right questions. He's thinking about what possible questions that there might be. And we basically have team leaders that are better supported by the team members because they have learned to think similarly. They've learned to speak this common language. And Robert adds a possible solution and says we bill our customers electronically, so please ask IT to check the recipient address for Kansas City. Let's check back in an hour once IT gets to look at it. So they're taking an incremental approach and they're taking a more focused, more specific stab at the problem, much closer to solving. So quick examples, do sales drive profit? You know, a lot of times we think that, but when we break it down, that might not be the case. You know, the more sales we have, the more it might be costing us, and so greater sales might not be greater profit. And that's why when we have numbers in front of us, we want to look at pictures. Is it important? Is it important for sales to greet customers? You know, you go to Walmart and they say hello to you. Do you think that increases their business? Well, they think that for a reason. They have those individuals, but the picture might not support that. So we want to really understand everything that we're doing has contributes with some level of value to our business. At this point, I would encourage everyone to think about various corporate myths and legends at your company and things that have just been done a certain way because that's how it's been done for years and years. But we need to remind ourselves of the fact that conditions surrounding our companies, conditions surrounding our roles change dynamically and all the time, and so we need to adapt to those changes. We need to think about what's going on around us, and we need to constantly measure the things that are happening around us. So if you're getting ready to do further study in this field and maybe proceed on with a Greenbelt training, good question to ask if you have everything you need, and are you going to sign up for a training? Do you have any green belts and black belts in your organization that you can talk to and see how they've successfully applied what they've learned in their trainings? Is the person you're reporting to trained in statistical tools? So once you start speaking this language, the person that you report to, will that person be able to interpret your new way of presenting your observations, and do you have permission to challenge the status quo? You know, a lot of some companies are very close to their traditions, and some of these traditions, while might be benefiting the company, some might be hindering and preventing the opportunities to achieve greater success. So it's good to ask that up front. And what would the reaction be if the data went opposite of what you thought? I mean, one of the projects that I worked on, it was an IT-related project, and I was asked to look at different IT assignments and coming from different departments, and how each of them were completed. And quickly I found out that the assignments that were initiated by the IT department, and especially by the head of the IT department, were significantly completed significantly less time than the other departments, and that project got killed. It was not seen. It wasn't seen necessary after that point, and basically couldn't complete it. So the reaction to the data wasn't necessarily favorable to what the organization wanted to see, and that created a conflict. So it's good to watch out for conflicts like that. You might want to take an incremental approach to make sure that you don't get stopped in the middle. And let's go quickly back to this. This is the last slide, the list of keywords that we talked about and what we want to remember from this quick overview. And keep in mind that what we just covered is a 4 to 5 day full day training class. I'm a 5 full day training class, and when I do it, it's from 8:30 till 4:30 full day. We do in-depth discussions on each of these concepts. We review these tools, and we do case studies on each of those to allow everyone to contribute with how they could be applying these concepts in their organization. So what we squeezed into an hour here is really a 5-day training class. So if there are certain concepts that were not clear here, do not worry about it, and you can contact me later if you want, and you'll have a copy of a handout that gives you a more detailed list than what we're just about to go over one more time. So we talked about defect and quality. Both are defined by the customers. We talked about visibility. Visibility is something that I find a lot of the times it is lacked by organizations. So once you create the visibility, problems become obvious. And with data, we create that visibility. Consistency, we always strive to be consistent in what we're doing. Every time we do it, we want to do it the same way. Reusable effort, we did something today, we want to be able to allow someone else to make use of it tomorrow. We want to have measured reports on everything, and we want to create a common language. We want everyone to know what we mean by baseline and time on defect, quality, and define phase, measure phase, analyze phase. Scientific, so we want everything that we do to be repeatable, reusable, and measurable, and we want to take a scientific approach. We really want a culture change and more than just a new procedure that's going to be documented. And we don't want to be opinion-based. We want to base our recommendations on facts. And quantitative versus qualitative question, we want to lean towards quantitative most of the time. And that covers what we have today. I know that was very fast-paced, and it's a very condensed version of what usually takes about, just this portion takes about a day and a half, and all the other phases of DMAIC, the measure phase, analyze phase, improve phase, control phase, that takes about 3.5 days. So it's really a full week training class that we recommend on the subject, so that everyone has the detailed understanding of the concepts and can go back to their organizations, their teams, and apply them effectively. If you have any questions, any comments, I'm available, and my contact information might already be available on the website, and some of you already have it, and I'm always very happy to answer any questions or comments you might have. So I'd like to thank again for Yang and Auto Care Association for giving me the opportunity to do this presentation, and I hope that I was able to encourage and motivate some of you to study more of Six Sigma and ask around what other people in your organization know about it. The next event that we have for Yang is going to be on January 21st. This is a webinar also, and it's going to be vehicle telematics, what the auto care industry needs to know, and into the future with Aaron Lowe and Derek Kaufman. And I'm definitely looking forward to this. It's something that affects every part of the industry, and it's having a growing effect on all of the producers, suppliers, just the entire supply chain. Katie?
Sure. Thank you, Tunc, so much for your webinar. Unfortunately, we're out of time for questions, but if there are any questions, I would encourage you to post them on Yang Connect. There will be a recording of this webinar available, as well as a handout. I'll make sure that gets out to everyone. We have a lot planned for 2016 from Yang, so keep your eyes open for emails. about a legislative summit that will be happening in late spring, or in June, I'm sorry. The Next Step program applications will be available early January, and there is a Women's Board scholarship that Yang is offering that is currently available. You can find it on the website autocare.org/Yang. And if you have any questions or need any information, feel free to contact myself, Katie McQuiston, or Courtney Hammer, who's the liaison for Yang, or anyone in the Yang Council. Thanks for making the webinars a success for 2015. This is our last one of the year, and we will be back January 21st to talk about telematics. Have a great holiday, and we'll talk to you in the new year. Thanks again, Tunc.
Well, it was my pleasure, Katie. Thank you, everyone, for listening in.